Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Always a pleasure.
Today we're going to be looking at,
A fun one.
yeah, a really fun one, the problem of induction,
Yes,
which
yes.
sounds very,
Technical.
yeah, very technical.
Yes.
But actually, it's something that we deal with every day, and I think when we sort of unpack it a bit, it'll become clear how relevant it is to all of our lives.
Yeah.
So to start off,
Uh-huh.
can you give us a little bit of background?
Sure. So the problem of induction. This is something that the great philosopher David Hume pointed out. And it basically boils down to this question. Can we really be sure
Oh,
that the future is going to be like the past?
hmm,
So, we all kind of assume that the sun's going to rise tomorrow because it's risen every day in the past.
right,
We assume that if we drop something, it's going to fall to the ground
right.
because that's what's always happened.
Gravity, yeah.
But Hume said,
Okay, so go ahead.
well, hold on a second. Just because something has happened repeatedly in the past,
Mhm.
does that really logically guarantee that it's going to happen again in the future?
Yeah, it's funny because when you start to think about it like that,
Right.
it does seem kind of crazy. Like I said, my coffee maker has worked, hundreds of times in a row, so I just assume it's going to work tomorrow. But is that really a logical assumption?
Right. And that is precisely what Hume was getting at. It's so ingrained in how we think.
Yeah.
This idea that the future is going to resemble the past, but when you actually break it down and think about it logically, there is this kind of jump that we're making
Yeah.
that doesn't have this really firm foundation.
It's like you said, it's just a habit.
Yeah,
We do it without thinking.
exactly. And it is a very, very useful habit. I mean, imagine trying to live your life without making any assumptions based on past experience.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we wouldn't even be able to get out of bed in the morning.
Right, will my legs work the same way they did yesterday? Will the floor be there when I step on it?
Right. I was just thinking about, like, if I go to the grocery store and I want to buy a loaf of bread,
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that it's not going to be poisonous
Right.
just because every other loaf of bread I've ever bought has, been fine.
Exactly. So we're constantly making these inductive leaps
Right.
in our everyday lives, and they're usually right.
Yeah.
But the points Hume is making is that they're not necessarily based on this kind of bedrock
Right.
of logical certainty that
Yeah.
you might assume they are.
So is he saying that we shouldn't use induction? Or, like, how did he sort of propose that we deal with this problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's important to clarify that Hume wasn't saying we should completely abandon induction.
Right.
I mean, he himself acknowledged that it's just such a fundamental part of how we operate as human beings.
Yeah.
We can't function without it. But he was pointing out this kind of like glitch in the matrix almost, where we're making this assumption that we can't really justify logically, but it's so useful and so ingrained in how we think that we kind of have to go along with it anyway,
So I'm curious if Hume kind of put this out there and kind of left us with this problem, did anyone else pick it up
Oh, absolutely.
and try to sort of...
Yeah, this is one of those things in philosophy that really gets people going.
Yeah.
Once you start thinking about it, it's really hard to stop thinking about it.
Right.
And so, over the centuries, there have been a lot of really interesting responses to Hume's problem of induction.
Okay.
People trying to figure out, is there a way out of this?
Yeah. So what are some of the ways people have tried to deal with this very perplexing problem?
Well, let's talk about a couple of the big names.
Well, let's talk about a couple of the big names.
Yeah, so one of the most famous responses to Hume came from Immanuel Kant, a really influential German philosopher. And Kant kind of took a different approach. He said, Hume's right, we can't prove with like 100% certainty that the future is going to be like the past.
Right.
But Kant said that induction is kind of baked into how our minds work. Like it's so fundamental to the way we experience the world that we can't really function without it.
So like it's almost like an instinct or something, like we're just hardwired for it.
Yeah, exactly. Kant believed that our minds aren't just these like blank slates that passively receive information from the world.
Right.
He thought we have these like inborn structures, these ways of organizing and processing experience.
Okay.
And one of the key ones is this idea of cause and effect.
Right.
So it's not that we learn about cause and effect through experience for Kant. It's that our minds are already kind of set up to perceive the world in terms of cause and effect.
So he's saying, like, the reason we assume the sun's going to rise tomorrow is because our brains are basically designed to see patterns and make connections like that.
Exactly. And this was a pretty radical idea at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because it suggests that maybe induction isn't just this shaky assumption.
Right.
It's actually a reflection of the very structure of our minds.
Okay, so that's Kant's take.
Yeah.
What about other folks who've weighed in on this?
Well, another really important figure is Karl Popper,
Okay.
a 20th century philosopher of science.
Yeah.
And Popper was really focused on how science actually progresses.
Okay.
And he argued that science doesn't actually rely on induction as much as we might think.
Really? That's interesting because I always thought science was all about observing things and then making generalizations based on those observations.
Yeah, that's the common view. But Popper actually thought that focusing on proving theories true was kind of misguided. He said a truly scientific theory should make these bold, testable predictions that could potentially be disproven by evidence.
Okay, so it's more about trying to prove things wrong?
Yeah. He called it falsification.
Okay.
The idea is that if a theory survives repeated attempts to disprove it, then it gains credibility.
I see. So it's kind of like you're trying to poke holes in it.
Mm-hmm.
And if it holds up to all those attempts, then it's probably a pretty good theory.
Exactly. It's a much more rigorous way to test our ideas than just looking for evidence that supports them.
Right, because it's easy to find evidence to support something if you're already looking for it.
Right, exactly, like confirmation bias and all that. But if you're actively trying to disprove your own theory, that's when you're really getting somewhere.
So can you give me an example of how this falsification thing works?
Sure. So Popper used this classic example, the statement, all swans are white.
Okay.
For centuries, people in Europe just assumed this was true because all the swans they had ever seen were white.
Makes sense.
Right. But then explorers went to Australia, and lo and behold, they found black swans. So this one observation completely overturned what had seemed like a pretty solid belief.
Yeah.
Based on, hundreds of years of experience.
That's a good example.
And for Popper, this really illustrated how induction, even though it's useful, can sometimes lead us astray.
So instead of just assuming things are going to continue the way they always have, we should always be looking for that black swan that might prove us wrong.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got Kant saying induction is built into our minds. We've got Popper saying science advances by trying to disprove theories. It seems like we've moved a little bit from trying to justify induction to figuring out how we can use it productively, even with its limitations.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And it brings us to some even more recent developments in how philosophers and scientists have approached the problem of induction.
Oh, so this conversation is still ongoing.
Oh, absolutely.
This isn't just some historical thing that people used to debate.
No. This is still a very live issue in philosophy.
Wow.
And in a lot of ways, it's even more relevant today.
As we grapple with all these complex issues like climate change, artificial intelligence, all these things where we're trying to predict the future based on limited information.
So what are some of the modern takes on the problem of induction?
Well, there are a few different approaches that have gained a lot of traction in recent years.
Okay.
One of them is called Bayesianism.
Bayesianism. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Bayesianism. Interesting.
Yeah, and it's a way of dealing with the uncertainty inherent in induction by using probabilities.
Probabilities.
Yeah.
Okay. So instead of saying, my car will definitely start tomorrow, a Bayesian would say there's a 99% chance my car will start tomorrow.
Exactly. It's a way of acknowledging that we can't have absolute certainty about the future.
Yeah.
But we can still use past data to make, informed guesses or assign probabilities to different outcomes.
So it's like a more nuanced way of thinking about predictions.
Exactly. It's about quantifying our uncertainty.
And Bayesian reasoning is used all over the place these days. Oh, yeah. Like weather forecasting. They're not saying it will definitely rain tomorrow.
Right.
They're saying there's a 60% chance of showers.
Right.
And they're using these complex models that take into account tons of data to come up with those probabilities.
Okay. So Bayesianism is all about probabilities.
Yeah.
What about any other modern kind of perspectives on this problem?
Well, another interesting one is pragmatism.
Pragmatism.
Yeah. And pragmatists are kind of less concerned with the theoretical problems of induction and more focused on the practical consequences.
So it's kind of like if it works, it works.
Right. They're like, look,
Right.
whether or not we can logically prove that the future is going to be like the past induction works in practice.
Yeah.
It helps us make decisions. It helps us build technologies. It helps us understand the world.
Right.
So, for all practical purposes, it's justified.
Okay, that's fair. But isn't that a little bit like, I don't know, just kind of ignoring the problem?
It's not ignoring it. It's more like acknowledging that, sometimes the best we can do is use the tools that have proven effective.
Right.
Even if we don't fully understand why they work.
Yeah, like I don't need to know how a car engine works.
Right, exactly.
To know that turning the key is probably going to make it go.
Exactly. And pragmatism also encourages us to, be mindful of the limits of our tools.
Yeah.
And to be open to revising our approaches if they start leading to unreliable or harmful outcomes.
Okay, so it's like being practical, but also being kind of flexible and open to new information.
Right. Exactly.
Are there any other kind of modern takes on induction that we should be aware of?
Oh, there's one more that's pretty wild.
Okay. Hit me with it.
All right, so some interpretations of quantum mechanics,
Yeah.
which is, the physics of the really, really small,
Right.
suggest that even the fundamental laws of physics might not be as constant and unchanging as we once thought.
Really? So you're saying that even like the laws of physics might not be so lawful after all?
It's a mind-bending idea.
Yeah, that's heavy.
But if you think about it, if even physical laws can kind of fluctuate or vary, it gives even more weight to Hume's original skepticism.
Right.
It's like what we consider to be laws might actually just be patterns that hold true within a certain limited range of conditions.
So outside those conditions, who knows what's going to happen?
Exactly. All bets are off.
So this whole problem of induction is really making us rethink like everything we thought we knew about the world.
It's one of those things in philosophy that really shakes you up.
Yeah, it's a lot to process, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to process it.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners out there who are maybe feeling a little bit like the rug's been pulled out from under them,
right?
Why does all this matter?
Well, for one thing, I think it helps us appreciate the limitations of science.
Oh, okay.
Science is an incredibly powerful tool, but it's ultimately based on inductive reasoning. We can't prove with absolute certainty that the laws of physics are always going to hold true.
Right.
But we rely on them to build bridges and design airplanes and all sorts of things.
So it's a reminder that even our best scientific knowledge, it's always kind of tentative.
Exactly. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It means we should always be questioning our assumptions, testing our theories, being open to new evidence.
But how does this problem of induction affect like our everyday lives?
Think about it. Almost every decision we make is based on some form of induction.
Okay.
When you choose a career path, you're betting that the skills you're developing now are going to be valuable in the future job market.
Right.
When you invest your money, you're assuming that past market trends are going to continue. When you fall in love, you're making this huge leap of faith that this person's going to continue to bring you joy and support in the future.
It's true. I never thought about it that way before.
Right.
But we really are constantly making these inductive leaps.
Yeah. And I think understanding the problem of induction helps us be more aware of those leaps.
Yeah.
And to be a little bit more cautious, maybe.
Yeah. So it's not about becoming like completely paralyzed by indecision or doubting everything.
Right.
But it's about having a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
And critical thinking.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, this has been an amazing deep dive.
It's a fun one.
We've covered so much.
Yeah.
From Hume's original problem to all these different attempts to solve it or grapple with it.
Right.
And what it all means for us in our everyday lives.
Yeah. And I think the key takeaway is that assuming the future is going to be like the past is a useful tool, but it's not a foolproof guarantee. Right. So, be mindful of your assumptions, embrace uncertainty, and cultivate that sense of curiosity.
Well said. And on that note, I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. Given everything we've learned today, how confident are you that your coffee maker is going to work tomorrow morning?
I'm feeling pretty good about it, but you never know.
Indeed. A huge thanks to our expert for guiding us through this mind-bending topic, and to all of you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and until next time, may your assumptions be well-founded. or at least mostly reliable.